this is where I think, the grading companies have dropped the ball again to, I hate to harp on them and I hate to keep going back to the Stone Age of things, but just imagine how far along we'd be if all these millions of books that have been graded have been imaged, and you have this database already of these millions of comic books, of these millions of grade permutations, and we would already have this model. It would already exist.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Swagglecast, a video podcast series where I get to have elevated conversations with influential people in the comic book hobby. My guest today is Miguel from Shortboxed. He is the CEO and co-founder of the Shortboxed app, a very unique and innovative selling tool in the comic book space. This was a really great conversation. We talked a lot about the current state of the comic book hobby, talking about tech, its influence, e-commerce coming into the space, what that means for the live shows, and we even talked about AI grading and the possibility of it in the future. I hope you guys enjoy our conversation. Of course, it would be much appreciated if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you want to hear more conversations like this in the future, let us know what you think in the comments. And with that, I give you Miguel from Shortboxed. All right, well, we are with Gene from Shortboxed. Gene, thank you so much for hopping on the channel today. How's it going?
Good, thanks for having me on. I'm personally a huge fan of your channel, and I've actually been watching your channel since pretty much day one. So it's just awesome to actually be on camera with you.
Well, I'm gonna clip that out so I can have that little soundbite for
There you go.
for good keeping. Well, Gene, it's great to have you here. I'm a big fan of Shortboxed. I had a great time getting to go to the live event that you guys hosted. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. But I just want to, I guess, maybe kind of start with this idea of what did the comic industry do to deserve you and Shortboxed bringing tech into this space right now? I feel like the comic industry, at least in the side of pricing guides and sales platforms and all this stuff, has been in the Stone Age for a long time.
Yes.
And here you are coming in with big new ideas, bringing the Silicon Valley sort of tech wisdom into comics. I guess, what's your kind of general thoughts on sort of where comics have been in this space, and why is it that comics have sort of been such dinosaurs about all of the tech space and everything like that? Do you have thoughts on that? Like even in going into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it comes down to the only reason why we exist, why Shortbox exists as a company, is because the industry, as a whole, as you said, has been stuck in the quote unquote Stone Age, for so long. I don't think that's too controversial to say. I don't think anyone would say otherwise. It is an old school industry and hobby. It's been around since the late 1930s. Obviously, like, collecting really took off, after the Silver Age, but anything coming along from that long ago tends to stay stuck there, really, without evolving, and that's sort of really where the issue is. I could make the case that comic books have been dying for decades now, just as well as I could also make the case that comic books have never been hotter. Both can be true, depending on how you look at it and who you ask. But really, the primary reason why I think the industry itself hasn't evolved, when I say industry, I do refer to sort of the comic book industry as a whole. But obviously, from our point of view, it's mostly the sort of secondary collector resale market, compared to other markets like trading cards, sneakers, digital collectibles, even, and others. Is simply there hasn't been any motivation or need for innovation in the space. It's just been operating the same way, just fine, for decades now. And on top of that, there's always been, a lot of gatekeeping in the industry, and a lot of folks wanting to sort of kind of, protect the hobby and almost keep it from going mainstream, which is kind of a weird thing to say now because it is such a mainstream, part of pop culture. But, we have to remember that comics weren't always cool, right? It wasn't an industry you necessarily wanted to become mainstream. I guess another thing was, comic book collecting was hipster before hipsters existed. It was cool before people thought it was cool. And, myself included, I'm a lifelong collector. I grew up as a comic book nerd, but it wasn't something you necessarily, broadcast out to the world. And so, because of that, I feel like the market sort of kept within itself, within this club that really didn't care to innovate and push the industry forward, because it was just this cool thing that this small sort of like group was really into. And I think it actually held the industry back. They were just happy with the way everything was and reaching the same audience and, kind of sharing the same pie over and over instead of trying to figure out how to actually grow the size of the pie. And then I'm going to go on a slight, well, it's not really a slight tangent, but everything changed, 15 years ago. Actually even longer. I was going to say 15 years ago with Iron Man, the beginning of the MCU. But really, if you want to nitpick, you can say it goes back to 2005 with Batman Begins. That really
Right.
marked the era of comics actually becoming mainstream. They became cool. It wasn't just a hobby for nerds anymore. And you know, the subsequent years after that, up through today, comics became mainstream, and it's set up to become a massive industry, bigger than we could have ever imagined. Except it didn't happen, right? I guess that's
Right.
sort of my hot take, is that
Yeah.
it could
Yeah.
have gotten huge and far more mainstream than it is today, and it just never happened, because of lack of innovation in the space. Obviously, we all know that values have skyrocketed over the past few years. That we can all agree on. But really, I'm going to be quite blunt here. But what pisses me off is that we, as a community and as an industry, have had this incredible once in a generation tailwind to really push the industry forward with technology and innovation and improving access to comics and collecting and building modern tools and platforms. And what I mean by tailwind is the MCU, DC films,
Yeah.
comic book films taking over all media. Instead, we got stuck with the same platforms we've been using for 30 years. eBay, incumbent auction platforms built on 20-year-old web technology. So it was just a massive ball that was dropped, and a missed opportunity. And frankly, that's pretty frustrating for like a technologist like myself. And ultimately, that's why my co-founder and I decided to build Shortbox, because the industry needs it. We as collectors deserve a modern platform and modern tools and new ways to do things, to do something as simple as buying and selling comic books.
Right.
Sorry, I know I went a little off the rails there, but clearly
No.
I'm very passionate about this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, you bring up some good points, and it's so true, because it feels like you're right. Like, never in time has there been more sort of like pop cultural significance of comics. Yet, like, it does feel like the barrier to entry into comics, whether it be from like a vintage standpoint or
Mhm.
even just like the current comic book stuff, like the barrier to entry is just like it's really hard for people to get
Yeah,
in it, and the tools that are out there certainly don't help.
right.
And so one of the things that and again, I don't, I'm not just blowing smoke, but I just, when you guys came out with Shortbox, I was like, what is this thing that feels like it was made in the last like 2 years? Like, what is this, company? But maybe you can talk a little bit about that, like just the app itself, how you guys started it. What was the idea behind it? Obviously, you're passionate about comic books, but like, of all the things that you can kind of do and go into, like,
Mhm.
what was your thought going into sort of this space? Like, why did you decide to do it?
Yeah. Also, I meant to mention this earlier, just that, thank you for, referring to us as an innovative platform, as a tech company, because
Yeah.
while we are, literally a marketplace for buying and selling comic books, we are a technology company. We are a software company. And that's really where our backgrounds come from. So, if it wasn't obvious, the spark that set my co-founder BJ and I down the path of building Shortbox came from a place of both passion and
Yeah.
frustration,
Yeah.
right? Like passion because we're both lifelong comic book collectors. It's something that's been part of our lives for as long as we could remember. It's part of our identity, which I'm sure is the case for a lot of collectors out there. A lot of folks, watching and listening to this, it's more than just a hobby. It's a true passion, but also frustration, because nothing has really changed or evolved in decades. It was frustrating to us as collectors, and technologists, and really, we spent years complaining about how hard it is to do something simple as buy and sell comic books. You mentioned there being a high barrier to entry, and I agree with you 100%. That may not make sense to some of like the more seasoned collectors or sort of like the hardcore collectors out there, but most collectors are what I would consider casual collectors, or people who are new
Right.
to the hobby, and we need to appeal to new generations and new collectors. And it's kind of insane that there were all these massive barriers and sort of uh, antiquated platforms, because the secondary market for comic books, the collectible market, the resale market, is massive. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars changing hands every single year, on what's essentially, to what you referred to earlier, dinosaur technology, stuck in the Stone Age. And ultimately, we realized that nothing would really change unless we did it ourselves. So that's exactly what we did. We decided to build a platform that we thought needed to exist. And so we weren't just random, comic book collectors, that just had a pipe dream. My co-founder BJ, and he's my co-founder and CTO. We've both worked in tech, in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco our entire careers for some of the fastest growing startups and the largest tech companies in the world. And so, we kind of combined, our superpowers of what we're good at least from our professional careers. And we started working on Shortbox. We started working on it on nights and weekends, moonlighting and building and hacking, outside of our day jobs. We took PTO and vacations, literally just to hack. We would rent an Airbnb for a week at a time, stuck in the middle of the woods, where we would just be ideating and just be hacking and just be building. I mean, we did that for a number of months before we actually launched the app itself, and then before we actually went live, we took massive leaps of faith and left our jobs, admittedly, obviously very cushy jobs, in tech, to really work on this and put all of our effort into it, because we had so much conviction in what we were building, and we truly felt that this is something that the industry and collectors actually needed. And when I refer to this, what I mean is, it's essentially just a really modern way to do something as simple as buying and selling a comic book. Just a modern platform that isn't a 20 or 30-year-old website. Mobile first, a completely new experience, and just removing as many barriers as possible. So that was ultimately why we decided to build Shortbox, and sort of our origin story, if you will.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like there's any like allergy to doing the way that the new ways that you're sort of trying to do things? Like, is there anyone, do you feel any friction trying to get, because obviously you got to get a lot of, say, start with dealers, right? You got to have a platform with inventory to, sell in the vintage market. Do you get dismissed a lot in this space? Is there any like people that are averse to sort of this tech new way of doing things?
Yeah, it's tough, and it was very tough in the beginning, because, again, remember, the industry has been used to doing things the same way
Right.
for many years, and there really hasn't been any innovation in the space. And so, when we launched and while we were building, actually before we even launched, because Beej and I have been involved in the community for years now, as dealers ourselves, just as collectors, as community builders, as folks just being very active in the comic book community for many years. I don't know if people know this, but we launched the Shortbox app 3 years ago, but we actually created the brand and launched Shortbox over 10 years ago. We actually launched it as a blog. This was before there was a super active comic book community on YouTube or on Instagram or even on Reddit. We just wanted to build a platform for us to be able to connect with other collectors. And so we just started writing about comic book collecting as a blog. And so we came up with the name Shortbox. And so that was 10 years ago. But when we launched the app, it was really hard to convince collectors, especially old school dealers, to change their behavior, because that's essentially what we were asking them to do. It's not eBay. It's not a consignment shop. You're not just shipping books to a warehouse for another platform to sell for you. Not just that, there isn't even a website. It's a mobile app, and that did not exist before Shortbox. There was not a mobile first platform for buying and selling comic books. I'm sure you can go on eBay, on the eBay app and do that, but there wasn't a dedicated, verticalized marketplace specifically built for comic book collectors. And so it's a completely different behavior, and it's an old school industry that's resistant to change. But the beautiful thing here is that collectors today, like collectors of this generation and newer industry and newer generations, they expect a certain level of experience, because that's just what collectors and consumers today are already used to, with apps and experiences they're already using. It just never existed before us. So, again, a lot of this, we just started thinking about the landscape of consumer shopping, and allow me to like nerd out a bit. Like over 50% of people shop. Over 50% of people shop on their mobile phones. I do. I'm sure you have also. And that has been increasing year over year over year. I mean, mobile shopping outpaced web shopping years ago already, and it's only going to continue. Over 80%. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time I checked, when I read consumer reports and consumer spending reports, over 80% of people actually use their phones to help them make a buying decision when they're buying at an in-person retail store. So even when they're not shopping online and they're at a retail store or at a clothing store or whatever type of store, majority of people, 4 out of 5 people, actually still use their phone. They pull up their phone to look up information about it, to compare prices, to see if there's other places where they could buy it, to read reviews, whatever it is. And so, there is this obvious behavior that everyone is connected to their phones. And so for us, building a mobile first experience was was step one. And so, very long-winded way of me saying that we had to convince a lot of dealers to get used to that, and a lot of them were resistant to it, and a lot of them
Right.
told us it would never work because they want to be able to put their book out on a table and bust out their camera and take pictures of it and take
Right.
out their SD card and then plug their SD card into their desktop computer and then download the photo and then type up an eBay listing and then put it up and then do all these other things. Versus now, you just snap a couple photos, add your price, hit submit, and then you're off to the races. And so, yes, convincing them to try it was really, really hard, and a lot of them were resistant. But once they tried it, once they got on the platform, once they actually started receiving offers, once they actually started getting sales, it was that sort of, I guess a hallelujah moment where it was just like, the clouds part, and they're like, wow, okay, this is real, this works, this is cool. And so even today, the hardest part is getting people to just try the platform and have the experience of, submitting a book or even buying a book. And then once you get past that hurdle, it's sort of, clear skies ahead.
Yeah. And you have kind of added some pricing materials in the Shortbox app. And I'm curious about this, because this is something that there's a lot of companies that are sort of in this space. There's a lot of data that I would say is price gated, in giving away this information. I mean, obviously anyone can go to eBay, look at sold listings. There's other ways you can find prices of stuff, but you guys decided to kind of roll it out as a free feature. And as somebody who really likes the data stuff and is doing this manual, tedious work of putting indexes together and stuff. Yeah. And I please just
I appreciate the effort and I appreciate the work, because
steal
I
this
watch those
idea
videos.
from me. Just take it off of my hands. Just take it off of my hands. But to talk about this for a second, why is this an important feature, and what where do you guys want to go with all this stuff? Because it's nice to have these tools at hand, and why not sort of price gate it, or why not have it be add-on features for you guys? Is that
right? It's a great question. There's a lot to unpack there. At the highest level, when you think about the platform that we're building, the Shortbox platform, yes, it's a marketplace for buying and selling comic books, but it's also not just as simple as just buying and selling a comic book. The value in building, a very focused, verticalized marketplace for a very specific user, being, comic book collectors, is that we can build features that make buying and selling easier. We can build features that support the activity of buying and selling and collecting comic books. When you think about sort of generic marketplace platforms, like I'm going to use eBay, for example, because they're the biggest marketplace, in the world, or even Amazon as another example. You could buy millions of different items, and they're not able to provide specific experiences or features, for those particular verticals. So, for example, when you buy a comic on eBay, it's just a generic listing. People just type in, the description, and that's what that is. Versus a very specific and focused marketplace like Shortbox, where it's built for collectors, it's built specifically for comic books. So what we can do is we can build features that support that and make that buying and selling experience even easier. So a perfect example here is pricing history. So when you go and you click on a listing, we're able to show you all the metadata about the book. Basically everything from CGC label notes is an easy way to think about it. We're able to show you all of the census data. We have a direct relationship with CGC, and so we show all the census data right in the listing. Also, we put in recent sales. We're able to show recent sales for that specific book in that specific grade, whether they happen on Shortbox or on eBay or on other platforms. And so a lot of it's just being able to build specific use cases and specific features for collectors, so that you don't have to keep leaving the platform and doing something else over there. Everything is just in one single place. And so that's sort of like philosophically, why we want to build a platform for comic collectors, because we have very specific needs and things that we do right before you go on eBay, and then you go to another website, and then you do this and you do that. And so we just want to build features that we think collectors need. Now, with regards to price guide specifically, the easy. So for those of you who don't know, we did launch a price guide. It's basically a pricing tool. You could just go on and you can search for a comic book, and if we have pricing data on it, we'll show you all the recent sales, for that book. Just very simple. We all know how to use eBay. We all know how to search for something and sort by sold listings and do that. But again, it's a very clunky experience. It's not clean. It's not intuitive. Again, actually, maybe a lot of people still don't know how to do that. I would argue a lot of the casual collectors don't. So for us, it was about just building a very powerful tool where you can just look up books and see all the recent sales. We have over 1 million sales tracked, most of which are recent from the last 2 years. But the reason why we decide to make it free, when there are existing pricing tools out there, they all charge a monthly fee, which is fine. If the tool works for you, keep using it, keep paying for it. That's all in good. But BJ, my CTO and co-founder, and I, we're hackers. We are technologists. We are huge proponents of open source software and access to information. And we have both been very involved in the open source community our entire careers. And we believe in an open and free internet and just access to information. So that just gives a little context into sort of like our philosophy in terms of like wanting to make sure that we level the playing field and ensure that all collectors have equal access to the same information that the sellers have, that the buyers have, because gating that information behind a paywall just doesn't sit right with me. If I'm going to be
Right.
blunt, like
Well, and
force
I
people like
want
to access information that's like really free and publicly available. And
right.
so we just want to really essentially just democratize access to pricing information and get everyone on the same level field, just because it makes buying and selling that much easier.
Right. Well, I have to imagine too, like, I mean, obviously we like eBay, is like the biggest marketplace. It's probably where most people, buy not just everything, but, comic books and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So it's like, I imagine that that's the challenge, right? It's like, you have to be able to provide people with some kind of added value as
Mhm.
to like, why should you break your habit of logging into eBay versus like going into Shortbox? And
Mhm.
it's like, what, if presumably, which is not really the case, but if presumably the same inventory is there, like why should you choose to do this? So I have to imagine that these features are probably actually really important to you
Yeah,
guys.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we're collectors, not just myself and BJ, but every employee in Showbox, all the way from our support and operations team to marketing to biz dev and even our engineers, we're all comic book collectors, and so we are our own customers. We're building for ourselves, and so we literally put ourselves in our customers' shoes and say, hey, what do I wish I can do? What's the information that I need to make this buying decision or the selling decision? It allows us just to build really, really quickly and build things that we actually think collectors want and need, because we are collectors, and
Yeah.
so we understand it very intimately.
What's the biggest problem then? Is it to onboard users or is it to onboard sellers? Because I imagine the user is going to go where the inventory in
Mhm.
theory is, but at the same time, the seller, it's like chicken and egg. The seller doesn't want to sell in a marketplace where they don't have enough
Exactly.
eyeballs. So
Yeah.
what's your
That's a
push
really good.
forward with
Yeah,
that?
that's a great question. Building a marketplace is really, really hard because there is the chicken and the egg problem. Sellers aren't going to show up if no one's buying, and no one's going to buy if there isn't any inventory of it available for sale. But to your point, and you mentioned this already, that collectors and buyers, they're going to go wherever the inventory is available,
Mhm.
right? If I'm looking for a specific book, in most cases, I don't care if I'm buying it from this person, that platform, that website, that shop, whatever. I just want the book that I need at the price that I'm comfortable paying. So
Yeah.
it's much easier to attract buyers, because they're going to transact, because collectors are going to collect, right? We want to make sure
Right.
we get the book, that we want, and we'll get it wherever we can get it. Obviously, it's our job to make that process as easy as possible with just a one-click checkout, and make it super easy to browse and discover and get alerted when things get listed for sale. That's all par for the course. Sellers are much harder to add to a platform because again, many of them already sell on eBay. Some of them have their own websites. Some of them don't sell online at all. Some of them only sell at shows. And like I mentioned earlier, we have to convince sellers and dealers, many of them are very old school, to take on a completely new behavior, something that they haven't done before. A lot of them, this might even be their first smartphone that they've used, convincing them to go that route. And so yeah, it's harder to get sellers. And
Right.
so that's actually why we put so much effort into taking care of all the sellers on our platform. We really, truly, this isn't just lip service. We really, truly bend over backwards, for everyone that sells, on Shortbox, to make sure that they're taken care of, because, we are going up against, the eBays of the world, these giant, giant companies, but our superpower is that we are a startup, that we're small, that we are collectors, that we understand our users, that we can react quickly and build features. We have people submitting bug reports and feature requests, and we're building those and shipping them the next day. So we're actually reacting, to the community, and building the features that they want. And so again, it's harder to get sellers, but we really go out of our way to sort of earn their trust. And at the
Right.
end of the day, if sellers are listing books and no one's buying them, they're not going to use our platform, right? So it's a
Right.
double-edged sword, where we have to make sure that we're also attracting buyers who are actually buying these books. And the beauty of it is that software helps with a lot of that. It's having good search, it's having good personalization engines, it's having good curation, it's having tools where you can see if a book is a good deal or not. We show these colored dots. We call them FMV indicators. If it has a green dot, that means it's priced pretty fairly, like within range of fair market value. If it's a red dot, it's a more premium price, over what we think is fair market value. So again, making the buying decision as easy as possible, not just buying, but also selling decision. When you list a book for sale, we show you recent sales and sort of FMV range, so you can price it accordingly without having to go and do research elsewhere. And it's bringing that entire experience into one app. It just makes everything easier for everyone.
Right, right. It's interesting. I imagine that part of what you just said is going to answer sort of my next question that I have for you. But I did want to pivot a little bit to like,
Mhm.
you know, the live show sales experience and e-commerce and
Mhm.
like this constant, change in not just comic books, but just in the entire space. But like, I guess what's your thoughts right now on like the comic book show? You guys spend a lot of time going to shows, like
Mhm.
having, I've seen you guys have like pop-ups and stuff like that. You did a Shortbox live show yourself, like
Which you were there. Thank you for being
which
there,
I
by
was
the
there.
way.
Yes. Yeah. It was a great time. But why are they needed anymore? Like, why do them? And like, or why, as you guys being sort of like this company that is like, we're an iPhone app, like, why bother doing it
Mhm.
if you're going to live in the e-commerce space? Like,
Right, right.
what's your thoughts on that?
Um, Great question. Again, I will say that comic book shows are even more important now, especially with more people buying and selling online. I think they're more important. Just to clarify a little bit, we like Shortbox, we don't exist to kill the LCS, the comic store, or we do not exist to kill the comic book convention or to render them, obsolete. Really, we exist to help comic book shops, help dealers, part-time, full-time dealers, help collectors, and everyone in between, just have a better alternative to buying and selling. Because whether someone agrees with it or not, most people buy and sell online now. In many cases, there is no reason to go to a con when you can just hop on Shortbox and find a copy, or hop on eBay, or go somewhere else and find a copy for sale, and not deal with lines and crowds and just all that stuff, and parking and hotel nights, all that kind of good stuff. And so, with that said, there is still absolutely a need for comic book shows, because while the majority of people shop online, and again, that's not going to regress at all, there's still an important reason why shows need to exist, and that's simply to build community. Like that is it,
Right.
period. Just to build and foster community. And that's such a huge part of this industry and this hobby. We're all collectors. We all probably feel the same way, that it's no fun to collect in a bubble or siloed. The nature of a collector is you want to share your collection, your passion. You want to connect with others who share the same interests. Social media, for all its pros and cons, has been this amazing tool for fostering this community, because there's something so personal and primal and fulfilling about connecting with other comic book people in person. And you can only get that at a con. You can only get that at a show. I've made so many friends from this community, many of whom will likely be lifelong friends. And most of them started online, just via YouTube or Instagram, or what have you. And I look forward to seeing them all in person at cons. That's what gets me excited about going to shows,
Yeah.
connecting with friends and the community and customers, and other dealers in person, to just celebrate this passion that we share. And so, with that context, I think shows, just like the industry as a whole, I think comic book shows need to evolve themselves. I think shows today need to be designed around community and facilitating face-to-face interactions, and not just for pure commerce. Because, to the point earlier where we could all go find every single comic book for sale online somewhere. We don't have
Right.
to go to comic book convention. Sure, like there's just something very nice about being able to examine a book in person. I get that too. Like I love that myself. But at the end of the day, just going to a con for pure commerce isn't the same experience as it was, even 10 years ago. That's a losing bet if you're only focused on the pure commerce aspect, and not so much the community building. And there's a couple things that I think shows can do, and that they're already doing and have been doing. So the most obvious example here is creators. Right? A lot of folks go to cons to meet creators, get books signed, collect sketches and commissions, and being able to connect them and tell them how much you love their work. That's a huge part of the convention, sort of experience. But also just content, right? I'm talking about things like panels, interviews, workshops, interactive exhibits, experiences that require and build, personal connections. And related to that is more networking opportunities. Now, with the community just being so active on YouTube and Instagram, on social media, we're all able to talk to each other online, but going to a convention and being able to network in person through meetups and drink ups and comic swaps and live auctions and stuff like that. I do think shows need to tilt a little bit more towards the interaction between con goers, and I think that's super important. And like I said, I think there needs to be sort of an evolution of the comic show specifically. And again, you mentioned earlier, we did our first show just this past May when you were there. Again, thank you for being there. We really wanted to take all the best parts about cons and kind of like redesign the convention experience from the ground up, which is why we put a big stage right in the middle of the floor, so folks like yourself and other speakers can come and give panels and interviews and give talks. It wasn't necessarily let's just put another con that's like every single other con out there. We really put a lot of effort into design what we felt like would be sort of like the next sort of natural evolution of a con to facilitate those interactions on site between creators and collectors and dealers and speakers and folks in the industry. So yeah, I think that's sort of where the sort of like the convention sort of industry needs to tilt towards. It is more community and networking and interaction between attendees, and less so about like come here to spend money and buy
Right.
comic books. So it's like, well, we can get comics
Yeah, you
everywhere.
can do that. You can do that anywhere.
Yeah.
That makes me think about actually. I've made some opinions on known on my YouTube about some of the kind of like remote signings and CGC signings and stuff, and how it like
It takes all the fun away.
yeah, it's a nice service. I do
Yeah.
understand. Like some people are just never going to have the ability to
Yes.
make it out to a
Agreed.
con and make it to meet an artist and do that. So I do understand that, but I do wonder if we lose a little bit. And actually,
We do.
while I have
Those sorry to
Yeah.
interject you, but like, clearly I have thoughts on this too. Like those sort of like virtual, or mail-in signings are good for a lot of folks who just don't have access or who wouldn't
Yeah.
be able to. Going to a con is expensive. Not everyone lives in a major city where there's going to be a con, 2, 3, 4 times a year. So like having these signings are good, but it should not be at the expense of not having in-person events and at the expense of not having in-person signings, because there is something very special about meeting a creator. Personally, I love getting books signed by creators. I still read comics. I still have a pull list, and being able to meet creators today and getting books signed is so satisfying to me.
Yeah. Actually, let me pick your brain from like your tech background and like sort of like the min max like nature of like most efficiency. I'm
Mhm.
curious, like, because I've had the opinion that I worry that if live selling, e-commerce, artist signing, like let's say I'm an artist, eBay Live comes out or whatever, and I fire up my eBay Live and I just do signings here, like literally in my room, and then
Yeah.
that's how you get your signed books. And then I'm like no longer incentivized to
Mhm.
like pack a suitcase and go to whatever, Emerald City Comic Con or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm just no longer incentivized to do it anymore. Like, do you think that would actually ever hit like a point where this would affect sort of the experiential market in sort of these cons and stuff? Like, do you have thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It can, and it could, and I could see creators saying like, "Oh, this is awesome. I don't need to pack my luggage and fly across the country and sit, on a chair for 8 hours and give signatures when I could just do it
Right.
from the comfort of my own home." Like there will be creators that do that, but I want to believe
Hmm.
that there are a lot of creators out there who find a lot of joy and value in meeting their fans face to face, being able to sign books in person, being able to draw and sketch for them, and hear from their actual fans of how much they enjoy their work. And I could only speak from my own experience, with every creator that I go to, and I make sure to tell them, how much their work means to me and how much I
Right.
love their story or their artwork. And thankfully, I haven't had, really any bad experiences with creators where they're like, "Oh, I don't care. That's nice. Thanks for sharing." Like, no,
Yeah.
no one's been like that.
Yeah.
They're always very, very appreciative. And I want to think and I want to believe that creators themselves have value in that and they appreciate that. And at the same time, it helps them grow their own brand, helps them to build relationships face to face with their fans and their community. And, again, that's not something that can necessarily be done just via live stream. But there is a time and a place for doing that virtually. I think that's super important because again, I'm all about making sure creators are able to generate income streams, and being able to sign books and draw sketches and do it virtually and reach even more people. That's where technology is helpful. It gives you reach and access to a wider audience. But again,
Right.
it should be used in addition to or instead of a replacement for those true
Right.
sort of face-to-face interactions. Because they're again, we're comic book people. We know how personal these stories and these characters are to us. So be able to share that with a creator face to face, I think, and I hope, is just as important for them as it is for us as fans of their work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you. Hopefully, yeah, people do still find value and joy and like energy in having the, face-to-face connections and stuff.
I think
With,
so. I hope
their
so.
fans. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you this. This is a little bit like of a pivot, but
Mhm.
I'd be remiss to not ask you from sort of your tech background, just this idea of like digital comics. I
Yeah.
know we talk a lot about like, or you guys work with a lot of like back issue market and vintage stuff, but like even just modern comics today, like
Mhm.
why do you think like digital comics haven't caught on? And I should follow up by saying, can they catch on? Can they
Mhm.
become more of a thing?
Mhm.
Um, and then I would pivot a little bit into this. Like, I don't know if you have thoughts on like the whole um, NFTs, digital collectibles, and that sort of space. And like,
Mhm.
does that change anything in the digital comic book market for you?
Right. Wow, there is a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
So I actually think there's sort of two things at play here and two ways to go about this. So I think you already answered my next question was going to be when you say digital comics, there's sort of two ways to look at it. There's either digital comics, as an alternative
Yeah.
to print comics in terms of just like digital comics that people read,
Yeah. Like Comixology or
yeah, all
Marvel
that.
Unlimited and
So
that
that
stuff.
there's digital comics in that sense, and then there's
Yeah.
digital comics in terms of what I'll refer to as digital collectibles. These are two very different things, but they're both sort of like digital comics. I just want to make sure that we clarify that. But I do have thoughts on both. In terms of digital comics for reading, like a Comixology or Marvel Unlimited or DC Universe and all those. Um, I would say that those types of digital comics have caught on. You know the major publishers, they don't share their readership numbers, sort of, between print and digital, or I don't know, maybe something's changed recently, but the last I known is that they don't really share their readership numbers for digital. But based on what we've been hearing or what they do, sort of put out there, all signs point towards digital comics, at least from major titles, outperforming their print comics, for the most popular titles, especially among women and younger readers. So for that reason, I think digital comics are here to stay. I still have a pull list from my local comic shop, but I also read digital comics. Just nothing beats the convenience of having your iPad and just like downloading the latest issue without having to leave your house, and especially if it's just something that you just want to read and not necessarily collect. There's a time and place for both digital comics and print comics. Just as there are with books. I read both physical books and on my Kindle. And I love both. And so I think that's a good thing. When you start talking about uh, comics as like digital comics as collectibles, like NFTs.
Yeah.
This is a whole discussion that
The
you could
dirty
probably
word. The
spend. You
dirty
could probably
word. Yeah.
spend a whole episode just talking about this. I don't want to go too
Sure.
deep into this. It's admittedly not my area of expertise, but I'm very familiar with the space. Again, sort of just as a technologist, myself. But really, I do think we're still at the tip of the spear in terms of digital collectibles. Whether you agree with the concept of digital collectibles or not, the reality is that collectibles evolve. There's many different ways to interpret, what a collectible is, whether it's something physical or even something digital. The big question is, how will the industry leverage, digital collectibles to make the industry better? How will they leverage digital collectibles to improve the industry? Or are we just going to get caught in this like endless cycle of pump and dump schemes for NFTs that
Yeah.
provide, no benefit or value? And we have seen a lot of that over the past 2 years. The market, the NFT market has obviously, crashed, into oblivion. And we did see a lot of that in the comic book space. It felt like every day there was a new comic NFT platform spinning up, and then they'd be out of business. And, the next week after they ran their pump and dump scheme. That is not good for the industry. That is not how you usher it forward. But obviously, I do think there still is a lot of value in digital collectibles, and it's just a matter of how companies and publishers and platforms utilize them, and are able to provide value through an NFT or digital collectible. And there's
Right.
multiple ways that you can do that. So it's not just a JPEG, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
actually different ways that you can use them. So um, the most obvious one to me is as proof of ownership, right? Having an NFT, you know, a unique NFT or a unique digital collectible as proof of ownership attached to a physical collectible, right? You know, because the blockchain is a public ledger, proof of ownership can be managed and transferred with a very clear provenance. Now, in order for this to work, you need collectibles to be stored in a secure vault, for instance, and you're able to mint an NFT as proof of ownership of that collectible. And now you can just trade ownership of that collectible via the NFT, via the blockchain, without ever having to pull the book out of a vault and having it to ship
Mhm.
between photos. So it's actually safer. It's actually more secure. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of collectors today that I wouldn't even call them collectors. You know, I would call them investors. You know, folks
Yeah.
that are investing in alternative investment assets and physical assets. You know, a lot of times they don't need to get that copy of AF-15 in hand because, you know, it might be $100,000 book. They want it stored in a secure vault.
Yeah.
And if they want to sell it, then, you know, really all you're selling is just a proof of ownership. So I think that's one way, you know, that digital collectibles can be used in this space, you know, pretty successfully. Another way is just access. You know, access. You know, if you think about like publishers or other companies using an NFT as a token of access to
Yeah.
giveaways, events, unlock special features or access to a platform. You know, I think companies can get super creative here. You know, this actually makes me think of allow me to kind of like go, start brainstorming here. You know, if anyone
Yeah.
takes his ideas and runs with it, feel free to
I
go for
like
it.
this stuff. I'm
But
nerdy in this
yeah,
space
me
as well.
too.
But yeah.
You know, they have the old Marvel clubs from like the 1960s, like the Merry Marvel
Yeah.
Comics
Yeah.
Club
Yeah.
that Stan Lee ran, or in the 1940s, you know, Superman had the Superman or Superman or Superboys of America sort of like fan club, you know, where they would get things in the mail. Well, now you know your NFT can sort of be your membership card, right? That's tied to a very specific person that only you have. Maybe this is just an evolution of the comic book fan club. You know, we haven't seen those since the
Right.
60s and 70s. Maybe it's time for a new generation of fan clubs to spin up, and but now there's a new modern way to tokenize that, you know,
Yeah.
and show proof that you're part of that club. And you know, they could put on events at Comic Con that, you know, special club members get into, and they show their NFT as proof of membership. So you know, there's a lot of like really cool creative things you can do there. And another one that's also super important is royalties to creators. You know, if creators are creating comics or creating artwork and minting them as NFTs, they're able to continue to get paid, you know, royalties each time that NFT is sold or transferred. You know, that can be written into the smart contract, and that would allow them to continue to get paid after, you know, a book gets sold. You know, that's sort of the downside of the secondary market, is that, you know, we could sell a copy. Um, of a particular book 50 times, but the original creator isn't going to see any penny after that, other than what they were paid to do the work, you know, however many years ago. So, you know, this is another benefit
Yeah.
of digital collectibles here, is that, you know, creators can create digital collectibles and offer them to their fans, and they can continue to receive royalties every time it's sold if they write that into the smart contract. So I think that's another very important way to do it. And again, but I think over the past couple of years, we just saw this huge rush and people just saw dollar signs, and you got a lot of the pump and dump schemes. And I think a lot of people were just trying to scam others, unfortunately. But again, we've seen this story play out before, and it is important technology. And I think there is a place for it in this industry and in this hobby, um, the right way, you know, that actually provides value to collectors. And I think it would, you know, just to be quite blunt, I think it'd be too premature to write it off and just sort of throw up the gates. And then we're back to what I was talking about, you know, when we first caught on here, is like the reason I got stuck in the Stone Age is because no one wanted to evolve. You know, everyone
Right.
wanted to keep things the way that they were, and not usher it forward. And I think, you know, digital collectibles really kind of opens up the floodgates. It's just there's probably going to be a lot of noise before we truly figure out, you know, what do collectors care about, and is this something that they should care about, and how can companies and publishers add value, you know, via there. So I think there's an opportunity there. I'm bullish, you know, but of course you have to wade through all the noise before you actually get to actual value.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of growing pains, but it is interesting. And again, I'm not like an advocate for this. I don't own a Batman cowl, but I know that like even in the Batman cowl space, like that
Yeah,
seems like what their DC's trying to do, right?
yeah,
Is create added value in both the comic book
mhm,
storyline and hey, here's some free movie tickets, or
right,
hey, come to the show and you can get this, whatever, whatever. So hopefully it gets there.
yeah.
I want to jump from one Black Mirror topic to another Black Mirror topic
I
with
just
you.
finished the last season, so this is very
Yeah,
topical.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we got to keep it, relevant to the culture right now, which with the new season. But and that's to ask you a little bit about AI grading, which
oh
I'm just picking all your tech
yeah,
mind here while I got you. Um, a lot of people have always talked about this idea of like, oh, can we do like AI grading? And
Mhm,
there, I think there actually is there's been some traction
mhm,
in the cards space to
mhm.
be able to get AI grading as a thing. Obviously, everyone's got complaints about CGC and CBCS and like grading is subjective and all
Mhm.
this sort of stuff. And there's a small subset of the comic book collector that wants AI grading to be a thing to like
Right.
make it more fair and neutral. Do you have any thoughts on this? Like, is this ever possible? Is this something you ever pontificate on?
Mhm.
Um, just sort of being where you are in the space, or do you think that grading will just always sort of be grading and there's always going to be a
No,
margin of
no.
error?
I mean, the short answer is 100% yes. Eventually, I
Mm,
think comic books can be graded or at least assisted by AI, but it doesn't have to be an either or. AI can help assist the process versus completely, replace it. You mentioned trading cards. It's already something that's being done right now in the trading card space, but trading cards are a lot easier to grade using AI than a
right,
comic book.
right.
There's just an infinite number of things involved with purely just physically. There are just more pages.
Yeah, you
There's
just
just
want
more
to just
things.
flop
A
it over.
card is just like top and bottom,
Yeah.
and that's it. So just from a logistical standpoint, using AI to grade a card is much easier, especially because the database of cards available is actually much smaller compared to comic books, which again have been
Mm.
in print since the 1930s. So there's an almost infinite number of books there and things to take into account. But I do think that AI can be used for grading. I mean, this is something that we're thinking about already, and we have been thinking about this, for a long time now. Obviously, with our backgrounds in tech and being in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco, I mean, all we hear about every single day in this area is AI. There's new AI startups popping up every single day. We've got self-driving cars driving around
Yeah.
everywhere, so
Yeah.
it's kind of weird. But at its most basic level, again, to anyone watching, if anyone wants to build this, please do, and please reach out. If you are already building it, or if it is something that you're thinking of, or if it is something that you're going down that path, I'd love to have a chat. And again, it's always good to connect with other folks who are building in the space and just to share ideas and all that kind of good stuff. But at its most basic level, if you were going to build a machine learning algorithm to grade a comic book, a lot of things need to happen. Uh, First and foremost, you need data, lots of it.
Mm.
And in this case, data means images, millions and millions of comic book images in every conceivable condition possible. So step one, retrieve millions of images of every comic book ever published in history with redundancies. After that, you need a standardized system, a standardized grading system, I should say a standardized grading system, and millions more images of examples of every conceivable issue possible. Again, do you follow the Overstreet grading scale? Do you follow the CGC grading scale, the CBCS? Do you make up
Mm.
your own grading scale? Like there has to be a
Mm.
standardized, grading scale to be used there. So that's another big hurdle there. This alone can have an infinite number of permutations across multiple grades and arrows because, as we all know, a golden age 6.0 is going to look different from a bronze age 6.0. You could take 10 different bronze age 6.0s and they're going to have 10 different, covers that all look different. Not all grades are created equal. And this is why having a standardized grading system is crucial. Not just for AI, but, in general, but we won't go down,
Right.
down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once you have all that, then you need to be able to actually attribute those standardized grades to every single one of the millions of comic book images that you have. And this is actually where I think the biggest hangup is going to be. This is the hardest step because this likely needs to be done almost manually because the training algorithm doesn't exist yet. You're trying to build the algorithm to be able to do this itself, but it needs to be trained on a model, and you have to be able to build that model. So you have to be able to attribute all these millions of images of various grades according to the standardized scale and match that against these millions and millions and millions of comic book images that you've collected, from the beginning of comic book time. And this is where I think the grading companies have dropped the ball again. To I hate to harp on them, and I hate to keep going back to the Stone Age of things, but I do think
It's
this
okay.
is
If you harp on them, everyone is gonna like the video here.
well,
Let's
I think this is where they dropped the ball. I mean, comic book grading has been around for 20 plus years now, and I
yeah.
think this is a perfect example of just sort of lack of vision, innovation in the space. Just because millions of comic books have been graded, and most of them have never been imaged, right? Like imagine how far along we would be
Mm.
if from the beginning of comic book grading, the grading companies have been able to image every single book. Sure, at the time it probably didn't make sense to, and I get it, like sure. But just imagine how far along we'd be if all these millions of books that have been graded have been imaged, and you have this database already of these millions of comic books, of these millions of grade permutations, and we would already have this model. It would already exist. So this is why I say the hardest part is putting together the data set. And that's kind of another step. You also need to build a structured database of every comic book ever published. There's a couple of sort of like open source options out there, but they're just simply not good. It's not clean data, and it's really hard. And this is a data set that has to be updated in real time because books are being published every week. This is something that we are actually building at Shortboxed, is a structured database of comic books, and we know we already have one. And so that allows us to build a lot faster and build a lot of like cool features that you see in the app. And so once you have all of that, then you can start to actually train a machine learning model. The model itself is relatively easy, compared to actually building the data set. That I think is what's holding up this from actually we're seeing like real progress being made. And again, this is also much easier if you only image the front cover. Maybe a basic version of comic book grading is just grading it just based on a picture of the front cover, but still requires a human to look through it. You can use just AI assisted models for confirmation bias. If it gets graded by a human and then you scan the front cover using AI and say, hey, this matches, then we can assume the rest of the grade or the rest of the book, is equal. But we're not quite there yet. I know there are a few folks out there and a few companies poking around this space and building sort of initial models. And so I'm bullish on it, and I hope we see some more progress over the next year or so. I think it's super exciting. Anything to allow us to do what we need done in the hobby faster and more efficiently
Mm.
is always a good thing. That's
Right.
always a good thing. It allows us to learn more, allows us to capture more data, allows us to react accordingly. It allows just more things to be done and built, and I think that's only a good thing. Again, just I think what we would first see it used as is just an assistant, like an assisted AI model, just to help the process, or even just for confirmation bias. I think that's probably the first place we're going to see it. But it's, in theory, again, very long-winded way of saying, yes, it's possible.
Mm.
In theory, it's possible,
Yeah.
but you need all of those things to sort of happen. So there's a lot that needs to be done there.
Well,
Also,
maybe.
it
Oh, go
requires
ahead.
massive computing resources. That is very expensive. So again, like after all that, after millions and millions of dollars invested, months or years, sunk into building the model, you launch you launch, and then the first customer says like, oh no, this is an 8.0, not a 6.5. You suck. It's like,
Right. Right.
okay, all right,
Right.
nothing's changed.
Yeah. Everyone's just going to get mad at the AI grader at this point.
Exactly.
Everyone will just be
Yeah.
upset. Well, maybe, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like maybe secret, in the secret level 5 access R&D side of the Shortbox office, there's some AI grading being built, because I wanted to kind of finish out with one little last thing that I feel like maybe you guys will be a little bit privy to. This is like, now that you're going to have all these raw books
Mhm.
coming your way, maybe you guys can start building that data set, as you're going to be handling this stuff.
Mhm.
But it is really interesting. In case people don't know, obviously you guys started with selling graded stuff.
Mhm.
Very easy to determine what the values are in the comps, and
Mhm.
know what book it is because of the serial numbers and all that stuff. You guys are starting to do raw books.
Mhm.
And there obviously is going to be a challenge. AI grading would be nice, right? If I could just scan my raw book and then just objectively, it's like, okay, this is a 4.0 or whatever it
Mhm.
is, and everyone knows that. But you guys are doing it where you are going to play the middleman here, and the book is going to go to you guys, and you guys are going to verify maybe the grades a little bit and make
Mhm.
sure that it's the book, and do all these sort of inspections. My main question to you that I have for this is, there's been some other stories about people being middlemen, or other companies having to do pressing work or being middlemen or carrying like someone's book,
Mhm.
and what kind of liability comes into play with that.
Mhm.
As you guys do this, now that you've sort of become this place where you're going to collect all the raw books and then send it out to the buyer, like, what liability do you guys face with this, and how are you going to handle this as, like, I guess, what issues come with this, and how, what kind of outcomes can you guys expect as far as like having sort of this high valued inventory coming in and out of your guys' offices. Is that a concern to you in any way?
Right. It's always going to be concerned when you're handling, customers' books. Again, just provide a little bit more context for those who may not be familiar. On Shortbox, most of the books sold get shipped directly from the seller to the buyer, and there are a few exceptions. So if it's a graded book over $1,000, it automatically comes to us first, and we do that for multiple reasons. One is just security and safety and privacy. At that level, we want to make sure that the buyer's receiving the exact book. We actually check to make sure the cert number matches. We also make sure that the case isn't cracked or there aren't any defects that weren't disclosed in the listing. So that's sort of like the pass through is us. But that's only for high value books. And again, it's a privacy and safety thing. So it allows us to control, that process. And now that we open up the platform to raw books, what we're doing is for raw book comes to us, we're not graders. We are not CGC. We do not claim to be professional graders. Like, we are not the ones grading the books ourselves. Ultimately, that falls down to the seller to accurately describe and place a condition on the book. So every seller, if you list a raw book on Shortbox, you have to state a grade. We all hate going on eBay and just looking at a listing, and they say, "Oh, I'm not a professional grader. Just look at the photos." Well, it's like they had to come up with a price, and the price is based on the condition of the book. So clearly, you have an idea of what condition is. You just don't want to say it because you don't want to be deal with like returns.
Someone's gonna
That's frustrating.
Always say your book is an FR. That's what I learned.
Yeah. And so it's so for us, what we are doing in terms of like policy wise is, let's say Mickey, you list a book and you're calling it a 7.0, and it comes to us first. What we're doing is, one, we're verifying that, is this copy of this book, is this exact book that was in the product listing? How do we do this? We literally compare the book in hand to the product listing photos, because for raw books, we allow you to put up to, I believe, 8 photos total, of defects. And so we can compare creases, tick marks, folds, trimmings, miscuts, all that kind of good stuff. We're actually comparing the product listing photos to the book that you shipped us to make sure, is this the exact same copy and not like a lower grade copy that you're trying to pass off, right? Like listing a higher grade copy and then shipping off a lower grade copy. So it's a way for us to protect buyers. So we just have to make sure, is this the exact book that was sold? And the second part of this is, even though I said, we are not the ones authenticating and placing a grade on the book. What we do is actually inspect the book to make sure it's within acceptable range of the stated condition. So what does that mean, right? If you call it a 7.0 and we inspect the book, do we agree with that? Obviously grading is subjective and it's not done by a machine, but does this fall within, an acceptable range? Like, if it comes in and to me, it looks like, oh, this is a 6.5, but you called it a 7. I think that's fair, right? I think that's a reasonable expectation.
Yeah.
Likewise, if we look at it and we're like, actually, this is like a 7.5, but you called it 7, like, that's fair. It's within an acceptable range. Of course, that's open to interpretation, but we are the ones that are hopefully, adding a level of safety and trust to the buyer that they're going to get a book that's in the grade. And what we're looking for are outliers, like really extreme outliers. If you're calling a book a 7.0 and it comes to us and it's missing a back cover, missing centerfold, and it should be a 0.5, incomplete, that allows us to protect the buyer and say, hey, this book is way off. It's not even in the same like stratosphere of what they said it was. Do you want to back out of the sale? Or we can also help facilitate and mediate between the buyer and seller. We can go back to the seller and say, hey, maybe you didn't know there was a missing centerfold. Do you want to still sell this book? You have to come down in price, and we can offer that back to the buyer. So it helps us protect both buyers and sellers. And so really it's our role to be that level of protection, between the buyer and the seller.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a big responsibility to take on, but like, it's very honorable to sort of be like the mediator between the two, because again, raw books it gets complicated with a lot of, these,
it's a mess.
transactions.
I mean, we've been buying raw books online and on eBay and all these other platforms for years. And so again, something has to change. Something has to be done a little bit differently. And where do we start? So this is sort of, step one of that. And can we build a process that works, that people trust? But again, we want most books to get shipped directly from the seller to the buyer. And we do that through features and through software, right? We make sure that we make them put multiple photos. We make sure that we show comps and recent sales, give both parties as much information as possible so that you reduce the amount of friction, you reduce the points of failure between buyer and seller, so that everything just runs very, very smoothly. And there's a lot of really intelligent ways that you can do that through features and intelligent design.
Right. Well, Gene, thank you so much, man. I've taken up a lot of your time. Maybe you can kind of just sort of wrap up and let the people know, what's next for Shortbox, what's next in store, and where can the people find you if they want to get in contact with either Shortbox or you yourself.
Awesome. Well, this is awesome, by the way. This is so much fun. You're a pleasure to chat with, but I will say, it's awesome talking about topics that I don't necessarily get to talk about much with other folks in the community, like AI and digital collectibles. So that's always fun to go down that rabbit hole again as a technologist myself. But again, for those who are unfamiliar with Shortbox, or maybe this is your first time, hearing about the company, we're a mobile app for buying and selling comic books. We just launched to add raw books, and there's a free price guide and a portfolio collection manager. We've got a lot of stuff coming. You saw Mickey during Shortbox Live. We announced that we're working on auctions. So we are building an auction platform that will be shipping, later this summer. So we'll be heads down, literally this week and over the next, 8 to 10 weeks, just building that. So there's a lot of really cool stuff coming. And again, you can find us all on social media. We're super active on Instagram. You can join our Discord, all the major channels, and we're easy to find and reach. And you can just download it on iOS and on Android. And again, my inbox is open. If anyone wants to chat or dig a little deeper on anything, or even if you just want to share any feedback or feature requests with me, you can just email me. It's just Gene, Gene, at shortbox.com. I love hearing from folks and chatting. And we'll also be at San Diego Comic Con for anyone who's going to be there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, hopefully some AI wizard sends you an email, because I would love to see
I would love
AI
that
at some point in the future. But Gene, thank you all so much again for coming onto the channel. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll catch you at the next one.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye.